I've been spending a lot of time recently playing Wyrmspan, a fantasy version of the board game Wingspan. It's themed around knowing ecological facts about dragons and exploring caves to build habitats for these dragons to populate. It's a lot of fun. The game comes with a bunch of extra stuff, including little egg tokens, solo play rules, but it also comes with this. This is a set of facts about all the playable dragons in the game. And for me, a lover of world building, this is a goldmine for me. Because board games don't need to come with lore. Yet, since they made the effort, how about we deep dive into their world building? See how it holds up to scrutiny and get deep into some implications and some speculation. Firstly, I need to stress that the world of Wyrmspan seems to be like ours, but with dragons always having existed. They use our sort of calendar, have passenger airlines, and seem to exist in a post-2023 world. In this book about dragon facts, as you might expect, there's a world-building emphasis on draconic research and discovery, especially highlighting the four main powerful guilds: the Forest, Plains, Highlands, and Seafarers, who seem to have broad authority over draconic exploration, naming conventions, and seemingly even population control. Also featured are what appear to be famous and well-regarded texts, such as Lady Pepper's Anthology of Dragons, which is referenced multiple times. It also seems to regularly quote dragon explorers' famous last words. Dragons and the research thereof aren't the only changes to this world from ours either. Dragon mice, Draco squirrels, and flaming foxes are all species stated to exist. This is alongside rabbits, garter snakes, seagulls, and marlins. In addition to this, there also seems to be a widespread sense of international law. In 1972, in this world, the Dragon Protection Act seems to have increased protection for dragons in order to stop their exploitation either for labour or in hunting and poaching. So this is a world with strong social organisation and what seems to be international law in place concerning dragons. But it's also a world that features often deadly encounters with wild dragons. So such a world would likely look very different from ours, despite using some of our conventions. Dragons in this world are said to have existed, often in the same form, for hundreds of millions of years, often significantly far longer than people. Some of these guys are dinosaur-aged, although we can either presume that dinosaurs all did die out in a mass extinction event and dragons somehow survived, or that dragons are this world's dinosaur replacement and they managed to make it through. It's really hard to tell from the few snippets of lore that we get. Why is all this important? Why should you care, especially if you haven't played the game? After all, this is optional lore included in a fantasy board game that I quite like. You should care because of a single throwaway comment in one of these many little detailed descriptions of dragons. There's nearly 200 of them, but it's one that really gets me. The initial name proposed for this dragon was the Napoleonic Firevern, due to a combination of its small stature and aggressive personality. I'm sorry, Napoleon exists in this world of Wyrmspan? Commercial air travel and diesel locomotion, which are both mentioned as existing in some of the other lore in this document, I can kind of buy. It's even quite likely that the study of dragon wings and fire breath and its effect on water and heating and steam might actually kickstart some sort of study of aviation and steam engines, which might eventually lead to diesel fuel, especially when there's a dragon called the Steely Fae that can generate its own electricity to the tune of a mid-sized generator. The Steely Fae, by the way, is mentioned as being heavily domesticated in this world. This holds together enough for me. But Napoleon, the Corsican nationalist, French Republican, and eventual Emperor of France, twice. This guy existed in the dragon-filled fantastical world of Wyrmspan? Let's take stock, because I might well be getting all riled up over nothing. Anachronism like this happens all the time across fantasy world building. You can't even really use the word goodbye authentically in most fantasy worlds. It's a contraction of a very monotheistically assumed God be with you. The words barbarian, telephone, and octopus also have similar issues. They imply that ancient languages and histories exist in said worlds where they are used. Most fantasy settings have barbarians and octopuses, at least, which heavily implies the existence of ancient Greek and Roman culture. Tolkien's solution to anachronism deserves a mention here. When linguistic anachronisms exist, such as turns of phrase which rely on English puns or culture, or words which have significant historical baggage, these things, they shouldn't be taken by the reader or audience to imply the existence of foreign concepts in this fantasy world, because the whole text, the whole presentation of the world is actually a translation and localization from the original texts of this fantasy world into a method that is understandable and comprehensible to us as English readers. It's an elegant solution. Basically, these anachronisms don't exist in the world, but they're choosing the best way to present it to us. It allows for the freer use of language in description without accidentally implying that Julius Caesar existed in Middle-earth. But I'm not too sure that this explanation fits for Wyrmspan. Despite all my calling this a world that's like ours, I think it would be more accurate to call it a copy of our world. Heck, it specifically refers to 1991 as a key date in cataloguing dragons due to the advent of digital trail cameras. This is too much of a coincidence, as in 1991 in our world, Kodak released the first DSLR camera commercially. Fundamentally, despite the minor changes we see, specifically concerning, the existence of dragons and things like that in the world of Wyrmspan, it is quite clear to me that this is supposed to be our world, but with dragons, as opposed to a similar world that's had a very different developmental path. Despite the changes, such as Draca squirrels and powerful dracology guilds, it seems that the implication of dragons as a natural phenomenon in this world is not considered to have affected the passage of time and progress at all, outside of events that reference dragons specifically. So is this the point at which I cry, "It's bad world building," and say these creators should have put more effort into speculative world building? No, that's not the sort of thing I like to do on this channel. I want to explore speculative world building creatively, looking for places that I can actually add to the discussion. And it is a discussion. None of this is correct. None of this is the right or wrong way to do things. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on what this world could be in the comments. But that's what we're going to do. Assuming the things that the Wyrmspan lore asks us to believe about the world are actually true in said world, how might such a world work? And what different paths might it have taken to get to a very similar place to us? First, I think we need to justify the fact that humans are thriving, exploring, and even holidaying in the modern day, while creatures like the fanged broadworm exist, whose teething infants have been seen biting clean through diesel locomotives. Now, this could be a classic Pokemon-style world-building situation, like Macago being hotter than the sun, for instance. This is an obviously hyperbolic description for reasons of physics. But I want to take the world building of Wyrmspan as much at face value as possible. To its credit in explaining how humans make it to the modern day, the lore does include multiple species of dragon who have historically positive relationships with humans. The good drake is noted as having held symbiotic relationships with humans in hunter-gatherer camps, indicating that some early hominids must have been useful or pitied enough by the dragons who pre-existed them for the dragons to have been sources of aid. Perhaps enough aid to counteract the negative and deleterious effects of other dragons. And I am using an evolutionary progress model here because the book does quite clearly state that many dragons have evolved over time, and some have stayed the same as they were when they were primordial 300 million years ago. Besides, more than simple warnings or mutual aid, other types of dragon may even have been crucial to speeding up human development. The rockbreaker species, as an example, they are known for tunnelling through the earth and digging up and exposing rare metals and strange materials. They might have been crucial in humans finding easy access to materials necessary for their thriving and survival, or getting shelter in caves that have been dug out by dragons. We also mentioned earlier the Steely Fae, who was widely domesticated as an electricity generator. And I should also mention the melodious fire dragon, whose eggs are stated to be capable of boiling 5 litres of water in 10 minutes if the egg is simply submerged in said water. Both of these dragons, the generation of electricity and the boiling of water, have immense progressional civilizational benefits, which might also help offset the dangers of draconic interference from their less helpful counterparts. Indeed, I'd wager that industry looks very different to our world, even if some features of the worlds are the same in the world of Wyrmspan. Steam engines are likely much older and much more well established than in our world, not just due to dragon egg boilers, but also perhaps to the fire breath of dragons that are helping out humankind. And the Steely Fae likely promotes various cottage industries with its power as a medium-sized generator. It's also very likely that dragons would have many military uses too. This world's Napoleon definitely would have used dragons, and not just as figureheads for his ships. Indeed, the crafty moray is specifically said to have been used as a figurehead on 17th and 18th century vessels. I'd suggest that dragons on the scale of Wyrmspan, which seems to range from quite small to fairly big, but especially the smaller ones, are likely to be helpful as humans, working as aerial scouts, for example. A clairvoyant fey dragon may well have been domesticated for their mind-reading abilities to perhaps sense violent intentions and prevent assassinations by sitting on a general's shoulder, for instance. And the perceptive antle dragon may have been prized in military campaigns for its ability to forecast storms and seismic events. Sea vipers might also have been employed in naval capacities, with their ability to, quote, burn a hole clear through a boat, while many other dragons may form as some sort of aerial support corps in battles earlier than we see aerial support used in our own world. Perhaps the Battle of Hastings was lost in this particular world because the Normans' continental wyverns were able to assail the Anglic longbowmen on their high ground, negating their terrain advantage with aerial bombardment. We should also perhaps look to what the text doesn't include. Despite these references to Napoleon, and a very documented specificity in the institutions of draconic research, there is no mention anywhere in the whole document of any nations or states as existing in this particular world. Just reference to broad geographic features like the equator and references to rivers and seas. This, combined with the fact that the guilds seem to be preeminent authorities, with broad scopes of power over perhaps the biggest labour-changing force in the world, dragons, and the fact that it seems like there is some clear enforcement of international law, suggests to me that perhaps this world is a little less divided on the human side, and states themselves might have lessened in impact and scope of their impact on history, in favour of international research consortia dedicated to specific environments. Perhaps the UK is under the purview of the Guild of Seafarers, while North Africa is broadly represented by the Plains Guild. Or maybe I'm just reading too far into this absence of any specific states as mentioned in the text. What I can say for certain, though, is that reliable record keeping about dragons potentially, but perhaps about all things, has been in place since the 1850s. So it's likely that the guilds start to attain significant power and resources during or slightly after this time, perhaps as part of broader social movements seeking to reform human attitudes to dragons, kickstarting a movement that 120 years later might lead to draconic rights to stop the exploitation of the Steely Fae for domestic electricity generation, for instance. Generally, in terms of the makeup of such a world, I'd expect human populations to be generally smaller, due potentially to historic malnutrition through draconic livestock poaching, and also for significant areas of wilderness to be left unexplored and unexploited, partly as a consequence of less crowded land use, and partly to give space to natural threats, dragons to live in these frontier areas. Frontier-like expansion is difficult if you're moving into an aggressive dragon's territory. Despite this, I also can see dragon domestication not just as a military or industrial tool, but as a pretty fundamental part of human progress in this world as well. Imagine a draft horse, but with an actively helpful personality, an appetite for granite or gems instead of, your food, and also with wings. In other words, it's a better draft horse that can also lift things vertically without need for complex pulley systems, and doesn't share a food source with humans or our livestock. It's very likely that construction and farming have heavily relied on dragons throughout this world's history. Not to mention the massive civilizational speed up that is having access to a regular, predictable source of fire. It's likely that Paleolithic humans had access to some sort of living flamethrower that they could tempt with spare meat. Yes, this world is likely to be far more dangerous than ours, in its natural environment at least. But it seems like the people of the world of Wyrmspan made it, just like we did. So what have we achieved with this intellectual exercise? Well, hopefully I've shown that even some simple bare bones world building can be made into a quite realised world with a little bit of speculative thought. That while eliminating anachronism is a noble goal, it's often impossible, and doesn't need to be taken too seriously as an objective. And if taken at face value, like we did with our Napoleon example, it can lend itself to a lot of fun. And I hope that if your world does have dragons, or other mythical creatures that could theoretically be of use to people, or the other way around, this video shows that you should give some more thought to social changes that may occur, or things that may be very different indeed in just basic setup and expectation in a fantasy world like that to us. And throughout all of this, if you've been thinking that you would love to explore this version of Wyrmspan's fictional world, be an explorer, a dracologist or chronicler in a world of unknown beasties, you could definitely do worse than mash up Wyrmspan's lore, world building, and the kind of beautiful dragon art with Mappamundi, an exploration and ecology TTRPG that has also some really gorgeous art. It's from 3 Sails Studios, who are not a sponsor of this channel, but they are currently in the process of showing off their new game where you play irate late medieval peasants fomenting rebellion against their ruling oppressors. A project which I have done some writing for, in full transparency, and maybe to get you excited about it, because I do love delving into history, alt history, as you've just witnessed a whole video of me doing that sort of thing. Keep Gallows Corner from 3 Sails Studios on your radar, is all I'm saying. Just to get a sense there of what else I've been up to other than making these videos. But with all that said, I've been Tom, otherwise known as the thegrungeonmaster. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you, I hope, in the next video.